Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Really glad that you're joining us today. As Lauren said, we're going to be recording. So everyone that registered will get a copy of this recording. If you also want a copy of the slide deck, just let me know. You can email me that, and I can get you a copy of the slide deck. Let me just do a couple of housekeeping things here. My name is Melissa Bell. I am the Center for Environmental Farming Systems Field Research for Research, Outreach, and Education. And today we're going to be talking about companion planting and cover crops, ways to increase diversity and welcome pollinators and beneficial insects into the garden. Um, So this webinar, John Little is not able to join us again. He's still on medical leave. Hopefully he will be able to join us again soon. Um, but it's not a full hour. We'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions and answers when this is over. So please put your questions in the chat box. Lauren can be checking that out. Um, and I'll go ahead and get started. And we'll get started. So companion planting is more than just tomatoes like basil. A lot of the information that we have about companion planting is anecdotal. So, passed down from generations to generations, people planting things in their gardens and seeing something that works or something that doesn't work. Um, but there is a science behind companion planting. And so, myself being in research, I was really excited to see the science behind what makes a pairing really work and or not work. So we're going to talk about companion planting more in terms of intercropping, and then the cover crops also as really increasing diversity in the garden. But the Old Farmer's Almanac defines companion planting as the practice of growing different vegetables and herbs and flowers near each other to maximize space, deter pests, enrich the soil, attract pollinators. By grouping plants with mutually beneficial habits, you create a natural, more resilient garden ecosystem that reduces the need for chemicals, and that's what we're after. Um, if you look up companion planting in the almanac, this is a link here for a companion planting chart. And I really like this chart because it will give you the pairing and then it'll tell you why that pairing works well together, and it'll have a link to an article or some research on that pairing. So it's a really nice link here. I'll give you, the last slide will have a resources link for you, page for you. But a really good example of companion planting is the Three Sisters, which has been, practiced for hundreds and hundreds of years by our Native American Indians in North America. And the Three Sisters is the practice of planting corns, beans, and squash together. There's a nice picture of it here from Virginia State University. We can see our corn and our beans and our squash. So the corn provides a stalk for the beans, which are vines. So they provide support for the vining plant. And the corn is also the carbohydrate source for the humans. The beans, which are legumes. So for those of you that don't know, our leguminous plants, our legumes, have a symbiotic relationship with a soil bacterium, rhizobia, and makes little nodules on its root, the legume's roots, and they're able to fix nitrogen. They're able to convert atmospheric nitrogen into soil available, plant available nitrogen. And they're the protein for the human. And then squash are large cucurbit leaves. The sprawling vegetation can smother weeds. It conserves soil moisture. And pumpkins contain lots of micronutrients important to humans. So it's a win-win-win, and a perfect example of companion planting. So a lot of the peer-reviewed articles or research, they'll talk more about intercropping instead of the words companion planting. Same thing, but they're called intercropping. We're looking at plant relationships and the mutual benefits. And this picture here is a perfect example of, maybe some spinach or arugula planted with carrots. And we'll see why that particular pairing works so well. There are known benefits of intercropping, and there are many, where you're maximizing the use of space. You can plant fast-growing things like lettuce, next to slow growing plants like tomatoes. So then as you're harvesting the lettuce, you're making more room for the tomatoes. They're structural corn or sunflowers for our vine crops like these. Intercropping also diversifies root structure. You can plant shallow rooted crops next to deep rooted plants, and you're avoiding competition for space and nutrients and water. You want to pair plants that need the same environmental requirements. Of course, you don't want to plant a shade plant, next to a plant that needs full sun. And then some plants attract beneficial insect predators, are things like ladybugs, lacewings, parasitic wasps, just to name a few. Or some plants repel pests because they have aromatic compounds or fragrant oils, things like basil or mints, lavender, and oregano. More benefits of intercropping: biochemical pest suppression, allelopathy. Um, Many plants are allelopathic, meaning that they exude from their roots a chemical that keeps other plants from growing. So, for example, marigolds or cereal rye, which is a winter cover crop, or black walnut. So, cereal rye, which I know a lot about, it exudes a chemical while it's growing and keeps all other plants from growing. And then, right after the plant dies and is decomposing, it's still exuding those chemicals. Trap cropping, this is a process of providing pests with their favorite food rather than your cash crop. So, you plant blue Hubbard squash, which is a winter squash, near your summer squash. Call the summer squash our cash crop, like a zucchini. And then the blue Hubbard is really enticing to the squash vine borer and the squash bugs, and they will congregate on the blue Hubbard squash rather than your cash crop. We'll delve a little deeper into trap cropping in a minute. Um, Physical and spatial interactions. You can grow tall, sun-loving plants like corn with low-growing, shade-tolerant species like spinaches or lettuces, maximizing that space. Symbiotic nitrogen fixation. We talked about that with our legumes. So you can grow a legume with a non-legume, and then you're providing, added nitrogen. Diversity of flower structure, something to think about. Ladybugs are attracted to flat top flowers like our cosmos or sunflower, and ladybugs feed on aphids. So we're thinking about, how to bring in these beneficial insects. To that point, this Growing Small Farms, this is a link to Debbie Roos' site called Growing Small Farms. She's a NC State extension agent for Chatham County. And she also has a really huge pollinator garden in Pittsboro at the Chatham Marketplace. Beyond that, she also has an amazing website. She's an amazing photographer. And so she talks a lot about organic pest management and pollinator paradise plants that are really good for pollinators. But she also has amazing pictures of both plant pests and then beneficial insects as well. So I really encourage you to check that out. The root zone stratification. So what that is the practice of like recognizing shallow rooted vegetables versus deeper rooted vegetables. So our shallow rooted vegetables, maybe the roots extend down 12 to 18 inches, and these are considered light feeders. So light feeders meaning light on nutrients. Basil, cilantro, lettuces, radishes. Can be planted with medium rooted vegetables that go 18 inches or deeper, but have more of a wide root system, more of circumference of roots like 14 inches wide. And these are things like corn and cucumbers, our brassicas, maybe compact tomatoes. These are heavier feeders, right? So we want to avoid competition for these nutrients. And then our deep-rooted veggies are heavy feeders below 24 inches. The roots can reach nutrients deeper in the soil profile, things like melons and lima beans, pumpkins, large, indeterminate tomatoes. These do really well with nitrogen-fixing cover crops. So we're thinking about minimizing that competition by, growing shallow with deep, then you're not going to have any competition. Also want to include our aromatic flowers and herbs. Things like cosmos attract many beneficial predatory insects. lacewings, parasitic wasps, hoverflies, and they also attract pollinators. Marigolds, we know they emit a strong scent that can help repel mosquitoes and aphids and other insects. Rosemary, very aromatic. It's an evergreen shrub. Has been shown to repel Japanese beetles, also carrot flies. A lot of these aromatic flowers and herbs, the way that they deter pests is that they confuse the pests and they can't find their host plant. Sage, also strong scented, can help protect against cabbage worms and beetles. And then basil, also, a strong aroma can deter mosquitoes, flies, aphids, and tomato hornworms. So that's probably why the tomato basil pairing, someone noticed that that worked really well together, that putting basil next to tomatoes really, cut down on hornworm pests. So this information here is from Insect Repelling Plants. This is a Master Gardener publication out of UGA Extension. So let's dive into a few examples of beneficial pairings. So tomatoes and basil, they all know that summer pairing. Not only do they taste good together on your kitchen table, but basil is aromatic. It releases volatile organic compounds. It releases a number of them. I chose one, citronello, that can naturally deter pests like whiteflies, aphids, and spider mites, hornworms. They don't like it. Also, basil has root hairs. So for those of you that don't know, the plants have roots, and then root hairs are even finer, extending from the roots, and they really expand the surface area of the roots. And so they are able to really improve access to water and nutrients for the tomato, symbiotic relationship there, resulting in greater yields for the tomato. Tomatoes pair well with carrots because they utilize different root zones. So you're maximizing space. They also differ in canopy height above ground. Basil's been shown to mask the carrot scent. And so they confuse carrot flies and thrips and armyworms. So that's also beneficial for tomatoes and carrots. Carrots also attract beneficial insects like parasitic wasps. Tomatoes and alliums grow well together. Alliums, they emit all the alliums, garlic, onions, leeks, emit a strong sulfur compound that can help mask the smell of the tomato. So beets and onions grow well together. They grow at the same time of year. Onions, they work by scent masking. So they emit a strong sulfur-based compound like allicin that naturally repels and confuses common insects. Garlic also works well to do this. Beets grow well with lettuce because they're shallow rooted. They grow at the same time of year as well. Cabbage really benefits from these aromatic herbs that confuse all the moths that are flying around trying to lay their eggs on the cabbage and the brassica's leaves, things like dill and chamomile, rosemary, and sage. Garlic has been known to deter the diamondback moth, so that's the one that lays the eggs that become the cabbage caterpillars that we see. And then sweet alyssum can attract beneficial insects like hoverflies, and I'll show you a research study that that did research on that and came to that conclusion. Peppers, they grow well with root vegetables like carrots and beets. There's no competition there, and then the root vegetables are also helping to break up the soil for the peppers. They grow well with marigolds because the marigolds are attracting beneficials and pollinators. Cilantro is a good one for our summer garden because, it grows well in the spring and then typically bolts when it gets too hot. And then the flowers of cilantro really attract beneficials like hoverflies. Oregano is another good one with peppers. It's a really good, just general pest deterrent because of its smell. So here's the study I was talking about. It's from ARS, the Agricultural Research Service. They were doing some field trials in California, focusing on leafy greens planted with sweet alyssum. They found that the blooms of sweet alyssum are an effective biological control agent for leafy greens. The flowers attract adult hoverflies, the syrphid flies, that feed on the alyssum and lay eggs, and then the syrphid flies eat aphids. So, um, a perfect example of, a biological control by blooms pulling in um, beneficial beneficial insects. Trap crops. We mentioned trap crops. So this is the practice of having a different crop that is more enticing to the plant pest than what you want to grow and eat. For example, nasturtiums, they can help trap brassica pests because they mimic brassicas by exuding glucosinolates. Mustards can attract flea beetles, keep them off your eggplants. But a well-known trap crop is blue Hubbard squash. It helps trap summer squash. This picture here, this is an example of field research at Lincoln University using blue Hubbard. So what you want to do is you can plant the blue Hubbard, which is several weeks older than we'll call it cash crop, your zucchini. You want those plants to be big and healthy so that they're really enticing when the pests come around, like the squash vine borer or the moth that lays the eggs for the squash vine borer, the cucumber beetles, squash bugs. So Blue Hubbard has high concentrations of cucurbitacin, which the summer squash also has, but Blue Hubbard has a higher concentration of it. So it's really enticing to these pests. And they'll congregate on the Blue Hubbard, and you can destroy that. You can spray that, do what you want with it. You don't want to intercrop with the Blue Hubbard because of the plant pests. You can plant here in this example, they planted at the end of the row. You can plant in a perimeter. You can plant a patch of it next door. The key really is starting the Blue Hubbard several weeks before you plant your zucchini, so that it's big and ready when the pests show up. I actually did a study with Blue Hubbard and summer squash down at our small farm unit many years ago, and it really does work. Plants that don't play nice together, there's a lot of charts out there. So I included a few, but basically it's using common sense, like not planting heavy feeders together, like corn and tomatoes, both heavy feeders. They're gonna, compete for space and nutrients, growing in the same environment at the same time. Broccoli and tomatoes don't really grow at the same time, but they're both heavy feeders. They also attract the same pests sometimes, like the corn earworm and the tomato fruitworm are actually the same pest. Cucumbers and squash, definitely attracting the same pests. The same cucurbits, same family, competing for nutrients. Shallow rooted perennials like strawberries, you wouldn't want to plant them with deeper rooted, root vegetables that are annuals like carrots. You're going to really disturb the strawberries when you're trying to get the carrots up. Both of them are also really vulnerable to verticillium wilt. So that's something to think about. What diseases are what you're planting, what are they really vulnerable to, and are you planting it right next to something that's also very vulnerable to that? And then onions and beans. So onions, they emit allicin, which inhibits the bean's ability to fix nitrogen. I did not know this. And then lastly, we really want to think about pulling in our pollinators. We want to plant things like dill, cilantro, the sweet alyssum, sunflowers, zinnias, cosmos, nasturtiums. Those flowers all look different. So they're going to be pulling in different pollinators. Not just honeybees. There's lots of different pollinators. Dill itself, it's a known host for our black swallow butterflies. But it also attracts pollinators. It's often paired with cucumbers. And maybe that's why we have, dill pickles. Cilantro is planted in the spring. Like I said, it bolts, and then it's a really attractive flower for pollinators like honeybees and bumblebees, parasitic wasps, ladybugs, and hoverflies. So I know a good number of beneficial insects, but there are definitely some that I don't know, and often it's hard to see an insect and figure out if it's a beneficial or a pest. And so Debbie Roos's website is really valuable for that because it has just fantastic photos. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, talk about cover crops. So yes, cover crops are really near and dear to my heart. And that's because soil is. And so cover crops help protect and nurture the soil. But they're also really a huge part of intercropping. So a cover crop is a crop planted between periods of regular crop production to provide other benefits beside food production. And those other benefits really are keeping our soil healthy. And, the soil is the most important thing in our garden. So cover crops help recycle and conserve water. Soil under cover crops is going to be, the soil moisture is going to be much higher because it's conserving water. Some cover crops help keep nutrients within the root zone. They're called catch crops or grasses. And so when you're growing a summer crop, you're fertilizing, you know, for whatever reason, sometimes your plant is not able to take up all the nutrients that you put in. And so over the winter time, say that nutrient is going to get lost through the soil profile. If you're growing something over the winter that's able to, that has, like grasses have this extensive root system, in that, uh, that root zone system where the nutrients are, and they're able to take up the nutrients in the plant body, and then when they are killed or die and then decompose, those nutrients are released back into the soil system. So they're called catch crops. Other cover crops act as a plow. They can break the plow pans called biodrilling, things like our oilseed radish and our daikon radishes. And really importantly, they protect soil from erosion and they help protect soil structure. So soil structure is very important because it protects the pore space. And, an idealized soil has 50% solid and 50% pore space. All our soils are different, of course, but that pore space is so important because it is where our water and our air is, all homes for all our little microorganisms that are doing all our nutrient cycling for us. And the spaces on the soil particles that are holding on to our nutrients and our water. And so if there's a heavy rainfall event and there's nothing covering the soil, that pore space can be completely destroyed. So if there's a heavy rain event and there's nothing there, we get mud, and mud has no pore space. So it's really important to protect that. And having something growing at all times will protect the soil structure. Cover crops also, they can act as a living mat that smothers weeds. When they flower, they support pollinators. Our legumes add nitrogen to the soil. There are nitrogen fixers. They can act as a green manure, meaning you're growing a lot of above ground biomass, and then you're returning that to the soil. You're adding soil organic material, and as that decomposes over time, maybe a fraction of that remains as stable soil organic matter. And then there's cover crops for every season and every situation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But really, they're also an important part of a diverse garden. So you can intercrop with cover crops. You can grow them as a border around the garden. You can have them on their own as part of a crop rotation. So we've spoken before about how it's important to know which family your vegetables are in. Like, for example, our Solanaceae contain a lot of our summer crops, our tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And our cucurbits contain our squashes and melons, pumpkins. And so if we're growing our tomatoes and peppers in one plot this year, next year we need to move them, and again the next year. And then that third year we can come back to the same spot. And this really decreases soil disease and plant pests, if you're moving your families, rotating your families. And so often that can open up a space for cover crops. Um, you can also plant cover crops in a space near your garden. That's cover crops are a very easy way to have a beneficial insect habitat. Um, and then again, there's several choices depending on what season it is, depending on the duration of time that you have to fit in a cover crop, and then also what your goal is for the cover crop. Do you want to add nitrogen or do you want to add biomass? Um, Also, you can be increasing below ground diversity as well, not just above ground diversity. This is a really cool chart that shows you just the diversity in root structures. Cereal rye This is one of our catch crops. It has abundant um, roots underground that to catch these nutrients that are coming down through the soil profile. The roots can go all the way down to 45, 50 inches, versus something like oats. They're very different. Um, Daikon radish and our oilseed radish going all the way down to 60 inches in the soil profile. These create channels in the soil that allow water and nutrients to get farther down in the soil profile. Sunflower, we have a really big radius of roots here. So it's just really interesting to see the diversity of roots. So breaking them up into simple categories, in our summertime we have sunflower and buckwheat, both summer cover crops, both very different in their days to maturity. So buckwheat is a very quick growing summer cover crop, 30 days to maturity, meaning you plant it and 30 days later it'll be flowering. Buckwheat also reseeds itself, so it can continue growing all summer long. Sunflower, on the other hand, will grow 80 to 100 days maturity, grow all summer long. So um, then we have our grasses, both summer and winter. They have extensive root systems to hold on to the nutrients in water. They provide a lot of above ground biomass. Most of our grasses are allelopathic, and they're higher carbon content, higher lignin content, and they decompose slower than our herbaceous legumes. If anybody wants to know more about carbon to nitrogen ratio and how that affects decomposition, we could talk about that later. But our legumes are the ones that are fixing our atmospheric nitrogen. They attract beneficials with they're a source of nectar. The plant themselves are 3 to 5% nitrogen, depending on growth stage. So when they decompose, they're also releasing nitrogen, and they decompose quickly because their CN ratio is very low. Their carbon to nitrogen ratio. Our microbes are the ones decomposing, eating all this biomass in the soil, and they need a certain carbon to nitrogen ratio to decompose. If they have a really high carbon content, they're going to be searching the soil for nitrogen so that they can keep eating. So a really common practice is to mix grasses and legumes together. Then you get a win-win. You get the benefits of the grass, you get the benefits of the legumes, and then you get a slower, more even release of nutrients back into the soil. And then lastly, kind of a catch-all here, our brassicas and mustards, things like our forest radishes, turnips, mighty mustards, beautiful beautiful flowers, really early pollinators, pollinator source are mustards and turnips. So I'm going to give you just a couple examples, and then I'm also going to give you some really scaled down rates for our cover crops for people that are growing in the backyard, even raised beds. So first up, crimson clover. This is a winter legume cover crop option, crimson clover or vetch. There are others, but crimson clover is a really common one. It's an end source, provides erosion control over the winter, so it's growing. This is one of my raised beds out in front of my house. Crimson clover is really forgiving. You can just the seed will germinate on top of the soil. If you can cover it with a rake, or a tractor, depending on your scale, even better. But it needs seed to soil contact, and it will germinate. It's off. You can also plant it interrow. Like often I'll plant, in between my collards over winter. So this is probably November. So you plant crimson clover ideally is planted in October, and you get a little bit of growth like this before it goes dormant in the winter. And then late February, early March, it starts to grow again. It flowers in early to mid-April, and then then it's a beneficial habitat and a nectar source. The maximum amount of nitrogen in the plant is just as it begins to flower. So if you're looking for that, you want to terminate it then, because then the plant starts putting all its resources and energy into making seed. And then the days to maturity of clover work really well with summer crops because early April, then you can terminate that crop and plant things like corn and tomatoes. So this is just an example I included because to show you it can be used on any scale. Oh, excuse me. Also, crimson clover is a good forage. Another choice is vetch. Now, vetch is a vining habitat. You can see it here. It's also a raised bed. It's one of our contributes the most nitrogen. It's a really prolific nitrogen fixer. It's got these purple flowers. My goal is to get this to grow all the way up, and it did grow more, but it didn't cover the whole arch. But then I just a couple weeks ago took all this down and planted cucumbers at the base of this trellis, and then I put the vetch material around my tomatoes. It matures later than clover, though. It matures in June. You can kill it at any time. Um, it mixes really well with grains because it can climb the grains. So vetch and rye work really well together. An excellent green manure. Um, some people, can become a weed, depending on your tolerance for that. Doesn't always become a weed, but it is an aggressive vine. It has a much larger seed that needs to be covered by soil. And that can be a tractor or that can be a rake. Here's an example. This is on our small farm unit at the Seth's Field facility in Goldsboro at Cherry Farm, and a beautiful field of crimson clover flowering. And also in the background here, we can see this is a crop field. We've left a border of crimson clover, and it looks like there's also maybe a grass cover crop over on the other side. And then this is an example of a mix. This is rye growing with crimson clover and vetch. It's a really common winter mix. I mean, I like to use it all the time. But crimson clover and rye seed readily available, not expensive. Um, I'll talk more about like where you can, get seed if that's something that you're interested in. Now, there are also winter cover crop options for grasses, rye and oats. We've typically used rye. It's very common. I've lately started using oats. I just think they're a little faster growing in the fall. They're sturdier and hardier, just more biomass, and they're pretty. So winter grasses, these can be established later in the winter. So our goal for the clovers are really October. November's okay. The grasses can be planted up into early December. They're excellent scavengers. They can carry like 25 to 50 pounds of nitrogen over to spring. They're good soil builders because of that abundant above ground biomass. You can see in this picture here from NC State Extension, this above ground biomass, and then this weed mat that can be created. This is a roller crimper being pulled behind this tractor. And what a roller crimper is a big heavy drum with these raised bars on them that crimp the stem as it rolls over it to make sure that the rye stays dead. I've seen homemade roller crimpers. You can mow the rye, but you can also roll it down and then you can plant directly into this weed mat. It is allelopathic. If you're planting seeds, you have to wait 2 to 3 weeks, but typically larger, vegetable transplants are not affected by the allelopathic chemicals, and you can plant directly into it. Rye attracts ladybugs, can be easily mown. And then I talked about allelopathy and being able to plant transplants into it. Summer cover crops, my favorite. Buckwheat and then black oil sunflower. So the black oil sunflower, the name I know is the Paradovic sunflower, and these are big heads, tall plants, not a more ornamental sunflower. But starting with buckwheat. So buckwheat is an amazing cover crop. It's excellent choice for short little windows in the summer. If you have spring crop and then a fall crop, you're growing brassicas and lettuces. You have those summer months, and you could have buckwheat. It's great though for intercropping. This is a field of it on the border. It's herbaceous. It doesn't get very tall. 2.5, 3 feet tall. So it's not going to shade anything else out. Like I said, 30 days to maturity, and it reseeds itself, and it's an excellent beneficial habitat. I love it. This is in my garden. I also have an in-ground garden up at my mother-in-law's place, buckwheat in the summer garden. So I'm intercropping with a bed of buckwheat. I also have some zinnias over here, and then I have my vegetables. Um, it grows, well in dry conditions. Here you can see the beautiful little flower, and these are the seeds that are going to turn black and then fall. If you ever had cashew, that's a buckwheat seed. So you can also eat the seed. It's just toasted buckwheat. Anyway, it'll drop seed and it'll germinate, and you could have several crops over the summer. Um, Borders or straight in, a bed in the middle of your garden. Now, as opposed to the sunflower, which is 80 to 110 days to maturity. So we have an all long season um, summer cover crop. It's an excellent pollinator source, excellent weed suppression. These can be used on any scale. It doesn't have to be an acre of sunflowers. But it's because they're so tall, they're best for planting next to the garden or on the border. You don't want to put them right down the middle because they create a lot of shade. But for example, here, I always plant one of my raised beds in sunflowers. They're just so beautiful. Um, and then here, this is at the small farm as well, on a border, and then a whole field. We always plant a whole field of sunflowers too at the small farm unit because they're just so beautiful and so good for beneficial insects and pollinators. Um, so all the seeds that I mentioned, for work, I buy 50-pound bags and I work on a scale of, 30 pounds per acre of crimson clover. Most of our fields are half acres. The math is really simple. But you can get smaller amounts of seed. I know clovers are often available at your local hardware store. Bulk, you can get like a pound of clover. But Country Farm and Home, which I just remembered I failed to put on the resource slide. But Country Farm and Home in Pittsburgh is a farm and garden store. It's really geared towards smaller farmers, geared towards organic farmers, but not exclusively. But they have a lot of seed that you can order bulk. You say, I want 5 pounds of vetch, 25 pounds of rye, 4 pounds of clover. So it's on Small Street in Pittsburgh. It's a fantastic place, also for all your drip irrigation needs, um, sweet potatoes, strawberries, that kind of thing. Anyway, so scale down seeding rates, things like oats, right? 4 to 6 ounces per 100 square feet. Crimson clover, 2 to 3 ounces per 100 square feet. I put in these conversions, studying soil science in grad school. I can say that there's 43,560 square feet in an acre in my sleep, but use this conversion all the time. If it's 30 pounds per acre and you have 50 square feet, knowing that there's 43,560 square feet in an acre, you can figure out how much seed you need. Now, often, it's small, 4 to 6 ounces. I like to work in grams. It just makes more sense in my head to have 500 grams of something. I know it's the same amount, but I have a little kitchen scale, so you can switch it into grams, because there's 453 grams in a pound, 28 grams in an ounce, etc. So you can use this in reference, or you can, there's websites out there that can give you scaled down versions. But this covers most of our cover crops that we've talked about. We've got the oats and rye for winter, mustards and radishes, mostly for winter too. Mustards and radishes have a really, really low seeding rate. Um, they don't really play nice with each other, so it's a lower seeding rate. Crimson clover, 30 pounds per acre, 2 to 3 ounces per 100 square feet. Vetch, a little less. And now cowpea is another summer cover crop. It is a legume. Um, Iron and clay cowpea we plant around here. It's a vine. Really long days to maturity. I've never seen cowpea flowering because it grows all summer long in its vegetative state. It's it's a field peas, and then buckwheat and sorghum Sudan grass is a summer grass. We have sorghum Sudan grass. We have our various millets like pearl millet and Japanese millet. I didn't include sunflowers here, but um, you can determine that, you can break that down by looking up pounds per acre for the Paradovic sunflower. Now, this is an excellent resource. Whenever I talk about cover crops, I mention this resource. This is from SARE, the Sustainable Ag and Research and Education. They have lots of wonderful resources, and most of them are free PDFs online. So this is a book, but it's also a free PDF. And it details all the cover crops that I mentioned, planting rate, how planting depth, seeding rate, but it also contains several charts that talk about cultural traits, performance and roles, days to maturity. For example, here we have the two legumes here, crimson clover. Is it a good legume source? Cowpeas, excellent. Crimson clover, almost excellent. Is it a nitrogen scavenger? Or is it a good erosion fighter? Does it grow quick? Can you graze it? Things like that. So it's an excellent resource if you're interested in incorporating cover crops into your garden. And then the resources. So the companion planting guide, Virginia Cooperative Extension. Here's Debbie Roos, The Growing Small Farms. An article, a PDF from Cornell on companion planting, Minnesota Extension, the Old Farmer's Almanac that has that nice chart with references that I showed you in the beginning, and then Sustainable Ag Research and Education, SARE, just a lot of really good resources. And then here's the article it's a PDF for the trap crop research. Okay, I've talked for 44 minutes. Let's get to some questions and answers. Like I said, just email me if you want a copy of the slide deck, or email me if you have more questions. Okay. Lauren, what do we have
Yeah.
question-wise?
So we had one question earlier when you were first talking about different places that you can plant cover cropping, and they were wondering if there's an easy way to use cover cropping in 5-gallon buckets, or if you should
Oh,
do that.
well, sure. I mean, let me try to get my screen up so I can see you guys. Um, I don't know. Anyway, sure, you can in 5-gallon buckets. I mean, if you're growing your crops in 5-gallon buckets, you can definitely keep the soil covered. I mean, I would use something like um, crimson clover, something smaller and herbaceous. Crimson clover, or in the winter, and buckwheat in the summer. You don't really have that need for a catch crop really, because everything's contained in the bucket. But certainly you could grow things that will attract pollinators and beneficial insects.
Mhm. And then someone asked, what is the pest that tunnels into sunflower seeds and causes them to rot? Is it bad for my vegetables?
Oh, I don't know what seed. I don't know what pest that is. I'm sorry. Um, you see, that'd be another example of like anecdotal um, companion planting. I mean, have you noticed that I would assume that something that's tunneling into the seeds of the sunflower is not interested in your tomato or your brassicas. But I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah. Why can I not see everybody?
Um, and then someone asked if there's a general cover crop that you would recommend for like a home gardener,
Yeah, for sure.
a catch-all maybe.
I can talk about that. Yeah. Well, I love crimson clover in the winter. Like I said, it's very forgiving. It's super easy to grow, and it just it's not growing over the winter, but it's especially if you get it in on early October, your soil's covered all winter, and then in the spring you get beautiful flowers. And it's a nitrogen fixer, and it's not a lot of biomass, right? So I've also grown grasses like on a home scale, and you have to use a weed whacker to cut them down. So depending on your scale, I've done that on that in-ground beds that I showed you, and like that's a lot of work. I don't think I'll be growing, sorghum Sudan grass again in there because it's just so much biomass. So on a home scale, I would recommend things like even oats. They don't get terribly big. The winter grasses don't get terribly big. The summer grasses do. So on a home scale, definitely crimson clover, very easy to work with. Vetch is great, but it's a little more because it's a vine. And then in the summertime, I always plant sunflowers and buckwheat, but buckwheat is, it's not going to get more than 3 feet tall, so it's also really easy to work with.
Amazing. And then another question we had was if intercropping is a nitrogen fixing cover crop during the growing season, could nutrients be stolen from main crops such as tomatoes or peppers?
Um, No. I mean, I'm sure there's the chance of that. If we're doing tomatoes and peppers, we're going to be in the summertime, and we're going to use something probably like buckwheat because we don't want the sunflowers to, compete for sunlight. And if you remember that chart that I had about with the roots, so the sunflowers had a really extensive root system, um, the big circumference of roots. So I don't think I would intercrop with sunflowers, but I would not feel bad intercropping with buckwheat at all. It had a really small root zone, and it's not going to shade anything out. So our tomatoes, are our more deep-rooted plants and heavier feeders. Um, Water, I guess, would be more of a concern. If you're drip irrigating, I wouldn't worry about it at all. I don't ever irrigate my cover crop. They're kind of on their own, but they're pretty feisty. Um, so I guess, yeah, if the question is, would you do it or which would you use? I would definitely, I feel comfortable intercropping, but you can always do it on the border if you're concerned about competition. Or like I said, like, a little bed next door. It's also beneficial, you want to bring in those beneficial insects and the pollinators.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
And sort of related, but how close should your companion plants be to each other?
Mm. I guess that just varies.
Yeah.
But whatever your spacing is for peppers, I would space your companion. I mean, I don't know. Things like marigolds and basil, you just sort of scatter about in between um your summer crops, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I also have
so
a bit of an answer to this as well.
okay, yeah, go for it.
For you want to follow obviously whatever your plant, like you said, with like tomatoes or peppers, like you can follow the spacing recommendation that they give you. But you also want to think about how different sun spots are going to hit. You don't want to put like your short basil on like the south or the north side of your tomato plants. And the recommendations that they give you on these seed packets are usually more so meant for like big scale farming. And so you can actually get a little bit closer than you think with some of them, especially if they're very different families and stuff like that. But I feel like that you mostly just want to worry about the sun and the shading when you're thinking about how close they should be to each other,
Yeah, that's a good answer. Mhm.
which is like part of it. I just feel like there's, like you said, it's so variable, but it depends on what you're planting next to each other. Um, but that was one tip that I had always learned,
Yeah.
especially for gardening when you're like, because you can like really maximize your space in a small garden. And you don't always have to listen to the seed packet and what they tell you to do. You can sometimes just go off of your sun shading spots.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true too about, as long as you're paying good attention to the health of your plants and pruning if you need to, you can plant things closer together than necessarily than what the seed packet says.
Yeah, it's a bit of a
I see a
overthinking.
question here about strawberries and raised beds. Um, so the first thing I would say is I don't know if I'd plant strawberries on the edges of my beds because strawberries like to spread. So the strawberry that you're growing, unless you don't want it to spread, they call it pegging. The strawberry will send out a shoot and it will peg into the ground and it will make another plant. So if you don't want that, then you can plant them on the edges. But if they're on the edges, they're not going to have room to spread like that. But I see that you're wanting to put alliums in there. I would switch it around and have the alliums on the outside and so that the strawberries have plenty of room to spread. Um, oh, someone's helping me out. Thank you. I figured it out finally. I had the controls hidden, but now I can see everybody. Summer cover crop combo of sorghum, Sudan grass, buckwheat, and sun hemp. Yeah, you can do them all at the same time. I have thought about this, but I don't know what scale you're on. It looks so you're on a farm, okay? Because the sorghum, Sudan grass, and the sun hemp put on a ton of biomass. And I learned the hard way that sun hemp, you want to make sure that you um, cut it at the right time. If you wait too long, it gets real, that lignin content is so high, it takes like over a month to start decomposing. It's like bamboo or something. Um, so the only thing I would say about that is you're not going to be mowing it. because you don't want to kill the buckwheat, but I guess you could. Just think about the management of the three. So sorghum Sudan grass benefits from being mowed, when it's a couple feet high down to like 6 inches, and it really when you mow it, it stimulates root growth, and you get even more biomass. So if you didn't want to mow the buckwheat, you wouldn't mow the Sudan grass. Um, I love growing sun hemp. It's a beautiful flower. But by the time you wait for it to flower, it often is kind of hard to deal with. But I like that idea. I think you would have you draw in the beneficials with the buckwheat. The buckwheat's going to get shaded out. And when I grew sun hemp, there was nothing else growing. So if you do that, I'd be interested in knowing if it worked, or if I don't know if sun hemp has allelopathic properties, but nothing else was growing in there, and it really shades everything else out. Um, I don't know. Blossom end rot is a calcium thing. That's a calcium deficiency. Um, so there's no companion plant that's going to help with that. You just need to have more calcium for your tomatoes. Red crimson and crimson clover. Okay, red crimson is a perennial, and crimson clover is an annual. So they're very different. Red crimson is really beautiful. It's often part of a hay mix. It's a good grazing, but it's a perennial, and crimson clover is our annual. White clover is also a perennial. Cover crop to run off gophers. I wish I knew. I don't have gophers, but we do have moles. And no, I don't know of a cover crop. I mean, mustard's pretty, uh, what, exudes a lot of chemicals that might deter moles, but um, I would look that up specifically, something to keep away moles. Um, mighty mustard has been shown to help get rid of nematodes, but it has to be managed properly. It has to be killed and covered right as it's flowering, and then it is an effective root knot nematode biological control. I've never used teff as a cover crop. That would be very interesting. Cereal rye and crimson clover last fall. Huh. So this someone asks, I sowed cereal rye and crimson clover last fall. Only the rye germinated. That's really interesting. Now the clover is germinating. So you're saying now, like June 9th, it's germinating because it's just going to die in the heat. Um, I don't know what you did wrong unless you planted the rye too heavily. If you seeded the rye too heavily, typically when we mix a clover and a grass, we want to decrease the seeding rate of the rye by like 2/3, and you keep the clover the same because the grasses are just so competitive. So that could be it. Um, and then also, for any seed, you need to have seed to soil contact. Um, okay, I think we hit them all. There's some new ones down here. When should I
Yeah,
terminate my sun hemp? Do you recommend using BCFs can do it? Um, I look, you'd have to look up the days to maturity of sun hemp, and I would certainly keep an eye on it. It's going to get 6 feet tall in a month. It grows really fast around here.
it does.
Um, and so if I didn't have a good way to manage it, a BCS is a good way, but yeah, you want to hit it when it's, maybe 5 feet tall or a little less. I mean, if you got a big tractor and a bush hog, you can let it get 6 feet tall, but if not, you're going to want to mow it before that. Now, sun hemp it's not a legume, it's not fixing nitrogen, it's just a lot of above ground biomass. Overcrop to speed breakdown of wood chips. I don't know. Wood chips are, there's a lot of carbon, so the decomposition of material is based on the carbon to nitrogen ratio. The best way to speed up the wood chips would be to add a bunch of nitrogen, right? If you have horse manure or something, because your microbes they need a certain ratio, 16:1, of carbon to nitrogen. And so if they don't have that nitrogen, they're going to take it out of the soil. It's called immobilization. And then that nitrogen is temporarily removed from the soil. So what you want to do is um, try to bring that carbon ratio down a little bit by adding a lot of nitrogen. Um, and I don't know that cover crop. Kelly, how do you pronounce that, Kelly?
Facilia?
Celia. No, I don't.
Facilia?
I've never used that as a cover crop.
I've heard about it on Gardener's World, so they know about it in the UK.
Hmm.
Just
I'll have to
curious
listen.
if you knew anything about it.
No, I don't.
Okay, thanks.
I want to write it down though. Look it up.
Yeah, the second part is Tennessetifolia.
Hmm.
Um, and supposedly it makes blooms that are really good for pollinators and stuff as well
Okay.
as
It's a little
fixing
purple.
nitrogen. So anyway, yeah, look it up and let us know.
Oh, well, great. Yeah, and someone else said that the mushrooms, the mycelium and mushrooms, like King Stropharia mushrooms, are good at breaking down wood chips. That's a great suggestion. Yep.
Hi, I have a question on the cover crop. Like, I
Hmm.
mean, I'm just asking if anyone tried, and if tried, which one is good for the scenario. Like, suppose if we made the beds, raised beds, and the beds were covered with plastic mulch, and in between, is there a cover crop that works better so that we don't need to do weed control in between the rows? And if
Oh,
yes, what is, yeah,
you're talking about planting something in between the raised beds.
right.
Yeah. Um, well, you need something that you can walk on, right?
Correct, correct.
Yeah, I would choose something like white clover. Um, it's
White
a
white clover, you said?
Yeah, white clover is a perennial and
Okay,
it's really low growing. And you see it in front yards a lot and grasses. Um, I think I would choose that because A, it's a perennial and you can step on it.
okay,
Um, yeah,
okay. Yeah, thank you.
white.
I also had a question from someone said, I'm in Charlotte. What are a few good cover crops for a partially shaded front yard? Isn't it a partial
Oh,
shade?
yeah. I mean, I have the shade problem too. I put all my raised beds where I have sun, but a lot of depending on the time of day, is shaded. During the summer, I think the shade is an asset, honestly, now. I think
Hmm.
any of the cover crops we talked about can grow in partial shade. I certainly grow crimson clover in partial shade all the time. Um, no, not necessarily. Tina asks, to maximize the benefits of a cover crop, do you need to let it die naturally? Depending on what your goal is. If you want the maximum nitrogen, if you let it die naturally, most of that's going to be gone by the time the plant is totally dead. But that said, I do it all the time. I just let the pollinators have at it. Um, because I'm in a raised bed and it's a small space, so it's really easy for me to add nutrients. Um, so it really depends on what um, your goal is. If you want a lot of above ground biomass, then you want to let it grow as long as possible. Um, but again, if you're letting something go all the way to maturity, if it's a grass, it's going to have a lot more carbon in it. The carbon to nitrogen ratio changes as the material matures. And so a mature rye, like dry straw, is going to take forever to decompose. But if you cut it like right as it's flowering and seeding, making the little seed heads, then you're going to get a much better and quicker decomposition of the material. So not necessarily letting things die naturally, but you can. It depends on what your goals are, how you like to garden. I don't know about companions for fruit trees and stuff. I'm sorry.
Hi, Melita. One more question on my previous question. Like, did anyone try like cover crop and no till, and again after cover crop, putting that down at the time of flowering, and then doing uh, plastic mulch? So, is there any a place that was already tried that way that you know? And if yes, then what is the best cover crop for that to continue no-till methods?
No till, yeah. Um, I'm not sure I understood. I'm not sure I
Okay.
understood. Laura, did you understand the question? I couldn't hear him very well.
Okay. No, 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 no worries. I will repeat it. So my intention is to follow the no-till method.
Uh-huh.
So if I want to do that, how we do the cover crop and then how we put mulch over it after putting that cover crop down. And again, after planting our cash crop, then how we repeat that process. Did anybody already tried? Uh,
Yeah, no, I'd love to know the answer to that. That's
okay.
one of the things
I
about
can
cover
answer
crops is
that.
you have to have a seed bed, right? What about you, Laura?
Yeah.
What did they do out at the agroecology farm?
Yeah, so at the agroecology farm through NC State, we're actually fully no-till. And what we would do is we would let it get mostly to maturity. And then when we would mow it down, just like kind of your standard, just like mower height. And then we would cover that up with a big silage tarp and leave that for at least like 3 weeks. And then that breaks it down really well. And especially in the summertime when it's like just heat blaring down. Um, but we would usually, there's like a white side and a black side. And so, like in the winter, the black side would be up. And then in the summer, the white side is up. Unless you're like purposely trying to solarize your field. But if it's like really, really hot underneath it, it'll just like solarize everything. So that just depends on like what you would want with that. But it is possible. And it
But
does
how do you get the seed? How do you get like the small crimson clover in the soil? Even because I mean, you killed the vegetation, but it's still there.
um it just depends on how long you can leave. Like, are you talking about like post termination
Yeah,
of
like how do
the
you seed like broadcast? I mean, if you have a drill, then you can do it. But this person like on raised beds too. But you know what you could do is you could make a slit in the soil and plant the cover crop in rows rather than just broadcasting the seed.
we would broadcast it like with our hands. We don't have like the churner thing, like the little backpack thing, but we would broadcast them. And then we do have a BCS with, or like a walk behind tractor with gosh, what's it called? It's like a weird name. It's not a flail mower
It's
or
like
a
a
tiller.
tilther.
It's not a tilfer. The blades go like this rather than like this. And so
Hmm.
it just like stirs the soil around.
It's like a
Power
rotary
harrow? It's a
plow.
power harrow. That's what it is.
Power harrow. Okay.
Yeah. So the blades are just going like this, but then sometimes when the BCS would inevitably break or something, as it always does, and we would just go in with rakes and just like kind of fluff the
Okay.
soil and like just at least get some soil contact on the seed. And then we would water it in really, really deeply. And then we wouldn't
Hmm.
water it really for the rest of the summer. Or I
Okay.
guess last summer we did because of the drought. And I know they are this year too. But if you just like put down the seed like you normally would, and if you don't have some kind of machine to just like stir it up, it's basically just think of it like stirring the soil just to get some soil contact on the seed. And then we didn't really have a whole lot of problems. It was usually irrigation related problems that we would have,
Hmm.
or just imperfect putting the seed down, which
Yeah,
will
because that's what
happen.
I'm trying to do with my in-ground beds is, have these permanent beds, but I want to
Hmm.
plant cover crops and I don't know what to do about the vegetation.
Yeah, because then obviously in ours were raised beds, and so we were only putting the power harrow on the actual bed itself. So then in the aisles there was a lot less germination, and it was only slightly noticeable. But I feel like as long as you get like a good watering on it
Hmm.
before anything else, before the birds get to it, stuff like that, um, I think that helped a lot because it really is just like the soil contact with the seed that you need.
Right, right. Oh, cool.
So.
And what is the crop cover crop you're using in this process?
We were using vetch, but we were doing hairy vetch,
Hmm.
and clover. One of the wheats. I took a picture of it a long time ago. I'd have to look, but I don't really remember the exact. We had four different.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's just your vegetation was just really, really dead and
yeah. We had a lot of clover. That was like clover was always our best performing one.
hmm.
Um, and then the grass, obviously, but grass is grass. It'll always grow.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for hanging on, everybody. Thanks for all the great questions. So yeah, let me know if you want a copy of the slide deck, and everyone will get a recording. Everyone that signed up will get a recording of the webinar. And thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Yeah. What type of
All right.
clover? We use crimson clover
Yeah.
at the farm.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.